Welcome everyone to this workshop on being presented by the RCP USA. I am Suneet Singh. For those of you that don't know me, I am the editor-in-chief of the Platypus Review. I have the honor of moderating this session with the RCP, with whom, of course, Platypus has had a number of engagements in the last several years, dating back to a piece written by Chris Catrone on the RCP, also to Spencer Leonard's interview with Clyde Young in issue 43, and the interview with Carl Dix, of course, in our election issue 51, and in some measure Ray's upcoming debate with Zizek was partly at the instigation, I suppose, of the PR in some ways, or in terms of the comments that Zizek made, critique that Zizek leveled of Balbavikian in the PR. Without too much ado, I want to say a little something about our presenter, Larry Everest. Larry writes for their newspaper, Revolution, and has reported on Iran, Iraq, Palestine, and India. He's the author of Oil, Power, and Empire, Iraq, and the U.S. Global Agenda, as well as Behind the Poison Cloud, Union Carbide's Bhopal Massacre. In 1991, Everest shot the award-winning video, Iraq, War Against the People, and in 2005 testified before the World Tribunal on Iraq in Istanbul. During the Q&A, we will be joined by Raymond, Lotta, who needs no introduction to most of you in this room. Since we are a little bit behind, we'll run till 10 after, I think, instead of 5 or just after 1, and we'll try to catch up. So, please.
Thanks very much. Thanks to Platypus for organizing the convention, and thanks to everybody who's turned out. Let me get right to it. Anywhere you look, spin the globe, the world is a nightmare. We just passed the 10th anniversary of the invasion of Iraq. Over 1 million people killed, 4 million injured or wounded, over 4 million Iraqis driven from their homes. The condition of women, horrific. We can look at the global environmental crisis and the threatened destruction of the fabric of life on Earth itself. We can talk about the terrible oppression of women, whether it be in the form of the patriarchal form of sexual degradation and trafficking and all the other forms of women's oppression that exists in the so-called enlightened West, or the barbaric conditions of women in many oppressed or third world countries, acid thrown in their faces for falling in love with the wrong person, going to school, so on. We can talk about the situation of black people in the United States, over 2 million people incarcerated, highest rate of incarceration in the world, incredible poverty, working conditions that make out of gruesome exploitation that makes Dickens look tame in comparison. In countries all around the world, workers being burned to death in Bangladesh. All this cries out for revolution, because all of this suffering, what makes all this suffering even more egregious and horrible is the fact that it isn't necessary. It's the product of a system of capitalism, imperialism. It isn't a product of human nature or any other fixed condition. Changing this world, ending these horrors, demands revolution, nothing less. And such a revolution is possible. You know, I know there's a lot of talk that in this convention that the prospects are bleak, and the era of revolution is over with, and proceeding from the state of what's described as a left. In fact, this is a system of imperialism, as I mentioned, that's riven with contradiction, that is fundamentally opposed to the interests of billions of people. So such a revolution is possible. And it's possible in particular because of the work Bob Avakian, who's the chairman of the Revolutionary Communist Party, has done over decades, summing up the great breakthrough that was made in the 20th century with the seizure of power in Russia, and then the further development of the communist revolution in Mao's China. Summing up the great achievements of those revolutions, as well as their shortcomings, limitations, and errors, and bringing forward a whole new synthesis of revolution and communism, really further charting the path of how to get from this world of horrors to a world where these horrors are ended and a thing of the past. And this is this new synthesis, and the work that Bob Avakian has done is a tremendous resource and weapon for oppressed people all over the world. So one of the themes that, and look, just to be clear, when we're talking about revolution here, we're talking about defeating and dismantling the existing state and replacing it with revolutionary state power, the dictatorship of the proletariat. And the vision, the principles, and the concrete measures that would be involved in this are spelled out very concisely and in a sweeping way in this Constitution for a New Socialist Republic in North America draft proposal that the Revolutionary Communist Party has put out. And this is a vision of a revolutionary state that is pushing this whole process forward to achieve what Marx called the abolition of the four alls. All production relations, all class relations, all social relations, and all ideas corresponding to capitalism and class society. And this is a very radical document. We're talking about a revolution that takes control of the economy and operates according to three basic principles: to advance the world revolution, to meet the needs of the people, and to preserve and protect the environment. No economic system prior to the socialist revolutions has functioned in anywhere closely resembling this. We're talking about a constitution that through and through begins with the orientation that the whole world comes first. Not America, not American workers, not the people in this country or locale, but the whole world and humanity comes first. It posits the ending of all military bases and occupations all over the world. It calls for the complete and radical restructuring of all relations between the United States and the countries that it is now oppressing and exploiting, and ending that, and in fact working to overcome that legacy, that terrible, terrible legacy that sees 22,000 children die every single day around the world from starvation or preventable disease. And it's a revolutionary state that most importantly is heading somewhere else to, as I mentioned before, ending ultimately all oppressive social class and production relations all over the world. Platypus posed the theme of the conference is utopia versus program. And what we're saying is we're, in what we might say, posing a radically different synthesis of that, is that there's a groundbreaking and visionary way to go forward, but grounded in a scientific understanding of society. So we're talking about an emancipatory society that is actually achievable and that we should be working toward right now. Now, is this an easy challenge? Of course it isn't. Is victory in any particular moment guaranteed? Of course it isn't. But this is doable. This is possible. And how is that so? I mean, that is a bold, I would say, statement. How's it so? Here I want to get into, for a minute, the strategy for revolution that's been brought forward by the Revolutionary Communist Party, and it's contained in the book Basics from the Talks and Writings of Bob Avakian. It's at the end of chapter 3. It's about an 8 or 9 page summary of this strategy. I'm going to touch on the highlights now, and I'm trying to be brief so we have plenty of time for a film clip. But the basic concept is this, that in the overall sense, yes, we're up against an extremely powerful enemy. But as I mentioned earlier, this is a system shot through and through with contradictions, difficulties, problems, of which crises and enormous suffering are built into the very fabric of the system. We realize we're not in a revolutionary crisis today, a situation in which millions and millions are determined not to live the old way, a time at which it would be possible to launch an actual struggle for power. So now we are both preparing for that moment and hastening the development of that situation, because one of the key principles in this strategy for revolution is the concept of hastening while awaiting, that there is not some iron wall between what the conscious revolutionary forces do and the overall objective situation. What people do consciously has a great potential to impact the overall terrain and the overall political terrain. So this whole strategy is an effort, as Bob Avakian puts it in this new film, which I encourage everyone to see, a 6.5 hour journey, a summoning to revolution that really can change the way people see the world and what they do with the rest of their lives. We're going to see a clip in a minute, but in that film he makes the point, we're talking about putting our foot on the political and ideological accelerator of events, not passively waiting until somehow a revolutionary crisis drops from wherever it drops from and solves all these problems. So there are a number of elements to this strategy. One is the concept of fighting the power, transforming the people for revolution. And that means that there needs to be, we can't allow people to be crushed by all this. We have to organize resistance to the brutal ways that people of this country and the planet are treated. For example, the Revolutionary Communist Party has launched initiatives to end pornography and patriarchy and the degradation of women, and it's organizing mass protests and actions against things like the taking away women's right to choose. In other words, forcing women into be enslaved to reproduction and to patriarchy. We've launched an initiative ending mass incarceration and the criminalization of the youth. And I think that people have, you were mentioning Carl Dix was being interviewed by Platypus. He's one of the leaders of this movement, and they basically had an enormous impact, especially in New York, on making the issue of stop and frisk a social question that can't be ignored, drawing hundreds, if not thousands, into the streets in different ways. But the point of this is, as people fight, as people raise their heads, to transform how they see the world, how they understand the world, how they relate to other people. And all of it part of transforming people for revolution, so people begin to understand what the sources of the problem are. How can we get out of this? How are all the different manifestations of oppression that people face every day part of one system? How could revolution actually change that? And none of these are things that come spontaneously. People don't just understand this from their own particular experience. It takes communist leadership, consistent communist leadership, to be able to make these radical changes before you are in a revolutionary situation. And again, the goal being to accumulate forces, that thousands of people, even a few thousand people, while influencing million more, so that those thousands are in position to lead millions when there is a genuine revolutionary crisis. But some of the elements of transforming the people for revolution are spelled out in this strategy, and two of the mainstays are, one, promoting the work and the leadership of Baba Vakian, encouraging people to dig into that, to learn from that, and to protect this extremely valuable leadership that we have. So that's one part of this. The other, as we say in the strategy statement, to learn from the chairman of our party, Baba Vakian, spread the knowledge and influence of his path-breaking leadership, and defend and protect this rare and precious leader. So that's one objective, which is now concentrated in this campaign, BA Everywhere, that aims to really put these breakthroughs that he's made out throughout society and transform the whole discourse. The second thing is wielding more fully the party's newspaper, Revolution, which I'm sure here people have seen, which is you know, a means for really doing two things: helping people understand the connections between all these different abuses, horrors, and injustices that go on, and to be connected and see themselves and understand themselves as part of this movement for revolution. In the film, Avakian called it being a collective educator and a collective organizer at the same time. And of course, I'm speaking quickly here so that we have plenty of time, but any of this, obviously, these are all important things to be talking about. But I think it's very, very critical that we work urgently and aggressively on this now. We can't afford to be in a situation like Greece or Egypt when people are being brutally fucked over, just to cut right to the chase. Millions of people rise up, and there is not a leadership that can bring anything good out of this situation. We can't allow this to happen. And I think people will get a sense of this strategy. I'm just going to read something that Baba Vakian just wrote coming off these film premieres that we did, but kind of encapsulates in a lot of ways what this strategy is. It says, this movement for revolution must now become a real force, powerfully impacting and influencing all of society, bringing forward growing numbers of those this system has cast out and cast down, who must be and can be the driving force of the fight to put an end not only to their own oppression, but all oppression, all over the world, drawing in many others from all walks of life who are inspired to join the same cause, preparing minds and organizing forces, fighting the power and transforming the people for revolution, nothing less. And then, so, you know, I've talked about this strategy for accumulating forces and getting to being positioned to actually launch a struggle for power when conditions emerged. And to be clear, we're not there now. This is not the situation now. But when such a situation arises, the Revolutionary Communist Party has also done very important work contained in a, I believe they have the issue of revolution back there, Making Revolution, Emancipating Humanity, which contains an essay called On the Possibility of Revolution. And in this essay, the party grapples with and makes really significant breakthroughs in the realm of military theory in terms of how a revolutionary force would be able to take on what would initially be a vastly superior military machine, avoid getting crushed, and ultimately be able to prevail over this, so that we can be in a position, as our new Constitution, as the new Constitution put it, you know, this new socialist republic has just been brought into being by a successful revolution and the defeat and the dismantling of the imperialist state. This has to happen. We're determined to make this happen. We're working with every fiber of our being to make this happen, and I want to invite everyone here to engage with that, to become part of this, to you know, really wrestle. This is urgently what humanity needs. And I want to end this segment with a clip from the film I mentioned, B.A. Speaks, Revolution, Nothing Less, that I think gives a sense of what we're talking about here.
I don't know if it's possible to dim the lights.
Can we dim the lights a little bit? Or shut them off?
So in opposition to the America First chauvinism that is endlessly promoted in this country under this system, and was again openly promoted by Obama in his recent victory speech, what we have to base ourselves on and proceed from is internationalism. Again, go back to the Constitution for the New Socialist Republic of North America, draft proposal, and compare it on the question of the country and the relation to the rest of the world with the U.S. Constitution. We have to proceed on internationalism. The whole world comes first, and the goal is the emancipation of all humanity, not the strengthening of our country to be the most powerful country in the world. The building of a powerful movement for revolution in this country, even before things get to the point of all-out revolution, can and should draw great inspiration and important lessons from people rising up in other parts of the world. At the same time, the more a movement for revolution is built in this country, with communist forces and a communist understanding and outlook increasingly becoming its leading core, this will have a tremendous impact, not only in this country, but throughout the world, on oppressed people and people yearning for a better world everywhere. It will change the whole equation, challenging and transforming how people throughout the world who learn of this think about and see the possibilities of radical change. We should understand the dialectical relation, or another way to say that, the back and forth impact and influence between building for and then, when the conditions are right, carrying out the all-out struggle for revolution in this country, and the development of the revolutionary struggle with a growing core committed to the cause of communism in other countries throughout the world. I think about an experience I had when I was forced into exile in France in the early 1980s. I met someone from Asia who was himself revolutionary-minded. And one of the first things they said to me was, what's happening with black people in America? What's happening with their struggle? Have the imperialists been able to repress and contain them? It seems like they're not rising up the way they were before. And I said, well, maybe temporarily, but don't be too sure. This is the kind of impact that struggles in different countries can have. And let's face it, you want to talk about everybody knows? Here's what everybody knows is true. Everybody knows that one of the hardest places in the entire world to make revolution is this country. And everybody knows that if there were a real revolution in this country, it would change the entire world and inspire people all over the world and change their way of looking at things in the world in a truly profound and radical way. I think about the comment. You can learn from everybody, even from the people on the other side of the struggle. There was this British commentator talking about the Islamic fundamentalists in places like Britain and in the world in general, denouncing them as terrorists, which many of them actually do carry out terrorism. What we are about has nothing to do with it, is completely opposed to what they're about. But he made a very interesting comment, which he said a generation or two ago, these people would have been Maoists, communists. You should think deeply about that. You see, what he was saying is, in a different world, when there was a socialist country in China, when there was a cultural revolution, when it stood for revolution and radiated revolution to the world and supported revolution around the world, that was a tremendous magnet of attraction for people. There's a lot of truth to that. Now, as I said, our objectives, our philosophy, our methods, our tactics, our goals, everything are completely and radically and fundamentally opposed, different from and opposed to Islamic fundamentals, especially those who carry out terrorism, even targeting the people. But there's something important to learn here. It has something to say about what it will mean if a movement for revolution, even before we get to the point of all-out revolution, will have in influencing people all over the world. This is part of our internationalist responsibilities, but it's also something that we can play a big role in affecting. But as important as all that is, it is still not enough. We have to not only fight the power and transform the people, and yes, have a powerful impact on people and forces throughout the world, while also learning from them. But we have to go on, and when the time is right, fight to actually win, to actually do what all this is for, making revolution, and making even greater contributions to this revolution throughout the world. Let's go back to basics, to fundamentals. Stepping back and looking at the sweep of human history, many empires have risen and fallen, with different peoples or nations, and in particular their ruling classes, dominating and plundering others throughout thousands of years of human history in every part of the world. In ancient times, to mention just some empires, Greece, Rome, Persia, China, Egypt. In more recent times, the British Empire dominated much of the world in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. And now there is the empire of the USA and others seeking to challenge it. If it's not about anything different and better than that, if it's just about shuffling things around this way and that, but keeping in effect the relations in which some people rule over, oppress, and degrade whole other groups of people, while humanity as a whole is shrouded in ignorance and devastated by war, and the earth is plundered and ruined, if it's just about some people improving their position within this horrific system, or it's about some groups that have been down for a while having their chance to be up and to have their turn at lording it over others, then I am not interested. And neither should you be interested. We have to fight oppression under the system in the different ways it comes down on people. But our fundamental goal has to be to get beyond all this, or the horror will just keep going on, and the great majority of humanity will suffer terribly and needlessly, unless and until whoever is on top ruins and destroys things, including the environment, so completely that it's all over for everybody. But once again, the point is that in a way that was not true in previous periods in human history. There is the possibility to get beyond all that and to a much better place for humanity. But for that to happen, there has to be a growing core of people with a basic understanding of this and a firm commitment to actually fight for it. A firm commitment to be emancipators of humanity.
Can we have the lights, please?
Which side would you like to be on?
All right. Did you
So
want
are
to...
you moderating between me and Raymond?
You have to hold this to the card. Okay. Well, I believe I have the privilege of asking the first question. And there's a lot, both from the clip and from what you've said, Larry, that... but let me ask a question that's, of course, a concern of, or dear to my heart about sort of the newspaper that you write for. And pose the question as one of the history of the RCP. My understanding, of course, is that the paper was originally titled Revolutionary Worker. And I was wondering if you could reflect on the new synthesis, the program that you've put forward, the new constitution, the approach that is evident in Ray lecturing on campuses, Carl Dix visiting a number of campuses, and this new orientation to students and to intellectuals. And I was wondering if you could reflect on how that's reflected in the change of the name of the paper itself from Revolutionary Worker to Revolution, and how that marks the trajectory of the RCP USA.
Great question. Yeah.
That'd be my first. I mean, there are a number of others, and then we'll open it up to the floor. But if you could reflect on the history in that way, perhaps.
Well, sure. Absolutely. I think it's a very good question. I mean, a key element of the new synthesis is that the revolution's aimed at the emancipation of humanity. It is not about ending the oppression of this group or that group. Yes, we want to end the oppression, all the particular forms of that oppression, but the point is to emancipate all humanity and get rid of all forms of oppression and enlist all of the people now subject to different forms of this to become emancipators of humanity, not simply fighters for their own, ending their own conditions and situations. And this includes the proletariat, the workers. And I know there's this is one of our profound differences with Trotskyism, for example. Our goal is the creation of the revolutionary dictatorship of the proletariat that's a transit to the abolition of all forms of oppression, not a workers' state. And we understand the role of the proletariat, which remains key, but we understand that to mean that the proletariat, because it occupies a certain position, it's the embodiment, if you will, in embryo of new relations of production, and therefore has the potential to be, the base, the material and social base of a radically different kind of economy in which socialized production is first owned socially, but then, of course, that's in transition as well. And this does break with even previous understandings by revolutionaries. We uphold Marx, Lenin, Mao, that there was an element of what Bababakian has called reification of the proletariat. In other words, because someone, and I can attest to this. I've worked in factories. You know, because someone is in the working class or is a worker doesn't ipso facto or automatically incline this or that individual or group to revolutionary communist consciousness. You know, the term revolutionary worker was too narrow, as you're kind of indicating really in your question, than the concept of revolution, because I think even in what I read, this latest thing from Bob Avakian is, yes, you do need a revolutionary movement anchored with a bedrock among those who, as Avakian said to Cornel West, quoting Malcolm X, those who catch hell every day. Those who are most downtrodden, not those who work in the largest or most unionized factories, but the most downtrodden. But that base has to be connected with and interacting with a much broader united front, if you will, of many different sections of the people. And none of those different sections can really play its full part in a movement for revolution or have the consciousness required. Look, we're talking about bringing forward emancipators of humanity that can lead a whole society where you're dealing with education, you're dealing with the environment, you're dealing with foreign policy. How could this be possible within the four walls of a factory? So even those from the oppressed community need to be transformed in relation to a broader movement that includes intellectuals and students and youth, very importantly, as well as gaining broader sympathy from the middle class. I mean, we call this the two maximizings. Anyway, I'll stop.
I mean, are people want to follow up on this particular question or go somewhere else? I mean, I'm just wondering.
I'll just open up the floor then.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just going to, I think this point is very, that our concept of proletarian, this is a proletarian revolution that we're talking about. A proletarian revolution. And it's a proletarian revolution because of the development of human society and where we are at this juncture of historical development. That is, we have reached this historic threshold where the basis exists to move humanity beyond relations of exploitation and domination and to move beyond scarcity. That we have actually reached this historic threshold, which makes a different kind of revolution possible. A revolution to put an end to all exploitation and oppression and to create a common material abundance that will serve the all-round development and emancipation of humanity. Now, there is an actual agent. There is an actual agent that, you know, that is at the font of this revolutionary transformation, and that is the proletariat understood as an international class, and that's very important, as an international class, bound up with its relationship to highly socialized, globalized means of production. So this revolution is a proletarian revolution, and this dictatorship of the proletariat, and I'm just going to round this out, that we're talking about, you know, is a class dictatorship, but it is not a class dictatorship based on the proletariat ruling over all other strata of society, the middle classes, the intellectuals. It's a dictatorship in which which reflects the historic interest of this class to overcome all forms of oppression and all relations, you know, both, you know, in the productive sphere, socially, and in the realm of ideas that correspond, as Larry said, to the division of society, because it's this class, the proletariat, has the historic and material capability to instantiate, to materialize that kind of society and world, but not by itself, and not unto itself. And in fact, this class cannot, the proletariat, cannot even gain a sense of its role, importance, and mission unless it is interacting with and part of a broader revolutionary movement. So it's very important to say there is a class character to this dictatorship of the proletariat, but it is being exercised in a way that is different, in fact, from the the first stage of proletarian revolution. And there's this understanding of proletarian revolution and how power will be exercised and what the content of this new dictatorship of the proletariat, this re-envisioned communism that Avakian has brought forward, involves a very broad and complex process of changing society and changing consciousness, and is going to involve many different channels of revolutionary struggle, transformation, experimentation, challenges, dissent, artistic and cultural ferment on a whole scale that's unimaginable in this society. As I said, including dissent. This dictatorship of the proletariat has been re-envisioned by Avakian, but it has this material grounding in the state of the world and in the existence of a class, an international class. And the last point I want to make about this, so that is sort of just underscoring that this notion of the revolutionary worker newspaper was, infected with a lot of sort of, the residue of some of this economism. It's the workers and the workers only, and the sort of that is a very different concept than what I am talking about here. On the other hand, the revolution that we're talking about on a world scale, this communist revolution, it does have a social base. It has in the wretched of the earth and the proletarians on a world scale, but not just the proletarians. It is the social base of this revolution is the wretched of the earth and their aspirations for something different. But that revolution is about the emancipation of all of humanity. And it cannot happen unless all these other social forces in society are being rallied to make a contribution and to become part of it for all to be transformed by what this revolution is all about.
Let me open up the floor here. We have Gregor, Spencer, and then Corey. So
about your last comment, Raymond, actually about the distinction you made between intellectuals and workers. I mean, I'm a student through and through. I'm stuck in phony academia, and it's not fun. But I still think of myself as an academic worker. So the distinction is not clear. It rather follows the impulse of sort of the postmodern left to diversify the working class into many particular small units that I'm comfortable with. But that's just a side note. You mentioned the need to create a revolutionary crisis rather than waiting for it to happen and then following it. But isn't precisely the last few decades, last century really, just an accumulation of crises, of revolts that have occurred and have accumulated in the past few years increasingly, in which the left has played basically no role, and which it was actually only following impulses of revolt among people. So I wonder what you make of this point that the left is just following rather than leading. And finally, as a last comment, I actually seriously don't believe that Islamic terrorists would have been communists decades ago, that they were already fundamentalists decades ago. And so that's why Afghanistan had to call the Red Army. But that's just a side note.
well, so there are, I guess, three kind of questions bound up there, right?
I mean, Bob would have to address that because he's thinking.
Well, I think we can speak to that. So I'll just quickly, first of all, Avakian's point was that, look, a friend of mine is from Lebanon, a professor, Assad Abu Khalil, maybe people know him. And he told me that there were secular leftists in Lebanon who were taking up Islamic religion because they were so angry at what Israel was doing to Lebanon, and nobody was fighting against Israel. The PLO had collapsed and sold out. People who were secular-minded were taking this up out of anger at what was being done. And I think that is what the point, look, that Bob was making in that clip is that people who hate the state of the world and who are looking for a way out of this and looking for a way to fight back look on the terrain, and the communist pole and a secular revolutionary pole is not on the terrain in the same way it was in the 60s and 70s when people all around the world, look, people in Palestine were holding up red books, were inspired by this. And so...
Isn't this a sign of regression that the left begins to turn to religion rather than following its proper course in the criticizing religion despite the circumstances it's involved in?
Well, look, this term, the left, the communists did not. The communists have increased our criticism of religion and further demarcated our project from any religion. I mean, I know this term, the left, gets thrown around quite a bit, but you know, that I'm not going to speak to that right now. But so anyway, I think that's his point in this was what impact the power can have of a revolutionary movement that is for genuine liberation, that isn't picking between one of these two outmoded reactionary forces that are so predominant in the world. Oh, here's your choice. If you don't like imperialism, become an Islamic fundamentalist. If you hate Islamic fundamentalism, support imperialism. No, we've got to break through that false paradigm and two horrible choices. And his argument was that we need to put this liberating communist revolution on the terrain. But let's just quickly, I never said that the subjective forces create a revolutionary crisis, but, I mean, your point's well taken. It can influence it. What people do has great impact. What happened when a fruit vendor burned himself to death in Tunisia? You know, what happened when people occupied Wall Street? It changed the conversation. It drew thousands and thousands more people into political life. What happened when this Stop Mass Incarceration, Stop, Stop and Frisk campaign got initiated in New York? There's been a whole ongoing struggle around that. So the point is that that the subjective, you know, has a big impact. But to your point, look, I think it would be, we are fighting so we are leading and not tailing in a crisis. And you're right to say there's been a whole series of crises and revolts around the world that have led to nothing. I mean, I was in Iran in 1979 and 80. I mean, you talk about a genuine revolution that was taken over by the wrong people. I mean, I won't go on about this, but it was a nightmare, you know, and I saw this unfolding. So it's incumbent on people here, us, and anyone who wants a better world to really take the responsibility to, you know, dig into Avakian's work and New Synthesis, find out about this movement for revolution, and to fight injustice and to fight oppression and go on this journey together. I think in the sheet that was handed out for this, there's this invitation from Bob Avakian that I think captures this in a good way. You know, the point isn't that none of you have questions and we're just telling you to, you know, accept things in an unquestioning way. No, just the opposite, you know. But I think we do. We can't let it happen where these crises keep happening and there aren't revolutionary forces capable of leading them to create a whole other society. Let's not forget Russia 1917. That was a great lesson of that nobody but Lenin saw the potential for revolution in that, and because he fought for it and led it, otherwise there would be no 1917 as we know it, without that leadership.
And the system is going to just, I mean, look, the system will recuperate from any crisis, or I mean, it's conceivable that it can collapse and disintegrate, but not lead to anything better or transformative in that cliff. You know, that Avakian talks about, you know, the decline and collapse of empires. The question is, what's going to replace these? So, you know, a revolutionary crisis is born of two factors. One, the actual workings of the system, its dynamics, and, you know, and all the contradictions at any specific wave or trajectory of its development founded in, you know, the very, you know, underlying dynamics of that system, but their political, ideological, question struggles, different forces, and that are influencing the trade. But in other words, a revolutionary crisis is born of the workings of the system, its contradictions, the wars, the economic crises, the political crises that result from the interaction between events in the world and struggles within the ruling class. In other words, it's part of that. On the one hand, that is in the matrix, but the other is the actual work of revolutionaries. In influencing, it's not just the political terrain, but the ideological terrain. I just want to emphasize that. In other words, we're influencing both the political, that is the alignment of how different social forces are aligned and relate. How do broad sections of the middle class look at the struggle of black people against police brutality? In other words, you're realigning, how people look at this. Where does justice lie? Of humanity from all strata, who in a revolutionary situation will be able to influence broader layers of society. But a revolutionary crisis is born of the workings of the system and the conscious work of revolutionaries that can actually, what Larry was saying, accelerate. And that was in the theme of, in this talk, but we can accelerate developments towards this. Now, all revolutionary situations will involve all kinds of novel and unforeseen elements. I mean, that's something else. And, Avakian kind of makes the point that it's a law of revolution that it's going to include all kinds of surprises and unanticipated events. So, in that sense, you're not going to be ahead of the curve in anticipating everything that's going to happen and unfold. But you are able, based on a scientific assessment of society and its political and social structures and social relations, you're able to develop a strategy that speaks, to the potential for society to erupt into crisis and to seize on that moment. But you have to be doing that work right now. And what we're saying is that we're both preparing the ground for the time when it is possible to make a bid for power, that is to meet and defeat the repressive forces that will come down on people who rise up. And when millions are rising up, the system is going to come down, and we have to be in a situation and in a position where people, when they millions of people no longer want to live in the old way, and when the ruling class is riven with these kinds of disputes and conflicts and can't rule in the old way, there's a revolutionary vanguard and a revolutionary people in their millions who are able to seize on this, with the party giving leadership to it. But a revolutionary situation is born of those two factors. It will always include the novel and the unanticipated. But what we cannot allow, and this is what history has shown, is that just to be sort of churned along and tugged along, pulled along by objective events, we'll wait for another 1960s. We'll wait for a 1968 in May. In other words, we'll wait for another Occupy moment. In other words, that is going to just put you on the constant treadmill of being reactive, and that reactiveness leads ultimately to passivity and to acceptance of the system as it is. Its workings then become, the workings to which you are simply responding, as opposed to this is the ground on which you are actually preparing, and minds and forces and organization, and changing the political and ideological terrain in a more favorable direction for that moment. So I just want to emphasize that. As far as students as workers, intellectuals as workers, maybe we could bracket that, talk about it over lunch. I don't think that's right. I think that it actually sort of, I think blurs over important social distinctions, not antagonistic distinctions, but important social distinctions in society.
Thank you. Spencer, please.
Yeah, I have three questions. I'm going to try to be as quick as possible. One, it seems to me that, in response to Sunni, we're really talking about the question of the working class socialism winning the battle for democracy is much closer, right? That you're making that the discontents in society as a whole are being taken up within a socialist project, and one can see that Avakian taking up issues of racism, issues of police brutality, issues that appear in newspapers, right? Issues that appear in our democracy. As it is if a flawed democracy, you'd say, can these really be addressed in our own society? And so forth. It seems to me that, here, part of that struggle society, within an existing politics, however it's rated, does raise the question of the left, right? And it's one of the things about the RCP that I really have a question about in terms of how do they relate to radicalized people outside of their organization, right? The struggle for, to lead those people, right? I mean, of course, it's true that you can go to the university and you can find young people who are willing to talk about ideas and so forth, but a lot of people have already talked about those ideas for a long time, and they're not in your organization. And for instance, you have the Constitution for a new socialist republic in North America. You call it a draft proposal. I'd like to understand seriously how that draft proposal would be transformed by absorbing other organizations, debating with them, coming to an agreement that yes, we accept your party, what we'd like to read, we'd like to discuss and deepen the question of this Constitution, beyond just talking to sort of individuals about it, but really, transforming a draft proposal into something else by, for instance, winning greater hegemony on the left amongst other organizations. That's the first question. So the issue of democracy in relation,
itself has 3 questions.
The other is, and this is, kind of signaled by the fact that, Marx tells us to win the battle of democracy. Lenin tells us that our newspaper is to take up the struggle of students and the struggle against the Tsar, and so forth. And I'm really wondering, to what extent do we live in a time of new opportunities? Do we understand our present as one of new opportunities? And I think that, for instance, even if we were to, kind of inhabit the note, I'm not as sanguine about the theoretical developments of the Chinese Revolution as perhaps you guys are, but even if we were to accept that, we would see that revolution is collapsing in the 1970s. And it coincides precisely with the Islamicization of revolutionary impulses in Iran. That this moment of collapse in the 1970s seems to signal an extreme rightward shift in anything that we can call revolutionary politics. And so I'm wondering about how this can both be a moment for new synthesis and standing on the shoulders of the past, and there are all these signs of manifest political regression. And the third question, and I really am very interested about this, is the strategic thinking about revolution in America, because you guys are a party in the United States, and I'm extremely interested about the prospects of revolution in the United States. Rather than talking about that sort of as such, as the goal. And on the one hand, Babavekian will say, well, it'll get the American empire off the backs of other people. Everyone knows what a hard road the American left has, and that this is the hardest place to make a revolution. But I'm wondering, if the strategic orientation is, in a sense, to make a revolution in the United States as, in a sense, the crystallization of the potentialities of modern society, or in the first world. Like, what does it mean to be oriented towards revolution in the first world primarily? And so those are the 3 questions.
Well,
you want to?
I'll say a few things.
I think, how we,
Whatever.
I mean, maybe I'll just start, look, let me just start with the last point and work back, and maybe we can work back.
Okay.
Look, let me just say firstly, I just want to make a brief thing on the left, okay? I mean, our attitude towards people, look, if people are genuinely sincere about, from different, quote, leftist, I'm not saying that pejoratively, left, I'm just, because it's the phrase that's used here. But if people from different radical currents, organizations, trends, and modes of thought, if you will, I mean, people like, if there is genuine, there's genuine sort of dialogue and debate and sharp and polemic, these things are very important, towards, in other words, I just want to say that with just, if we're talking about Platypus, there's, what is our, really, we should have unity struggle and see where that leads. In other words, that's what we're talking about. So just, you know, I mean, if people are sincere and genuine and are proceeding from, you know, and are debating in a principled way, you know, that is, what are the questions, what are the, you know, and big controversies, well then we can, you know, we need to argue these things out. And that's, I mean, we're kind of doing it right here. So, you know, you're asking, this is a manifestation of that. So I think it's you know, that's part of what has to be going on in society. But it has to break out of the boundaries of, quote, the self-described or, you know, officially sanctioned left, wherever that might exist, right? So, I mean, there are different intellectual trends, philosophical, that find expression in different, you know, radical formations. And that's one, and so we are serious about debating these questions out with people. The first wave of social, what happened in the Soviet Union and China? What is, you know, what does Marx mean by this battle for, you know, we have, you know, what is this question? You know, democracy. This is a big question that we need to, you know, Bacon has written a book on it and has written, you know, many different articles about this. We need to, you know, to go there. I would actually invite, I think we, the party, and Platypus need to have a more focused smackdown, if you will, over the question of democracy, what this means, right? So that's, I mean, because we can't do all that right here. In terms of this Constitution, okay? Well, this Constitution, that, you know, for the New Socialist Republic in North, you know, the New I just want to be that, you know, this is based on a very systematic, rigorous, creative application of this new synthesis of communism to the question of how would you actually constitute a new society based on the revolutionary seizure of power. That's what this is. It's not, I mean, we just be very clear, it's not based on how does one win a parliamentary majority and influence politics and economics in a leftward direction, so, you know, within the confines and the, you know, circumscribed by the constraints of what exists, right? So this is, so we should just, this is what this Constitution is about. It's a visionary document based on creating, you know, a new society, it's a new economy, new political, social structures. It actually is the rules of governance, the rules of the game, if you will. How do we create an emancipatory society, which is in transition to communism, which, you know, and so the back and forth of that, people's, you know, thoughts on this, those are all, we want to open the debate about this. You know, I do a lot of speaking on this. You know, I want to do a lot more. You know, by the way, the Zizek debate has been postponed by Zizek. You know, he's announced I'm glad we have it on, you know, on record that there was going to be a debate, but we need to have, but we want to, Savoy has it.
I get to say very
But I just want to say, but on this, so I just think the Constitution, and let me just make this other point, then, we are not oriented towards the first world. You know, our orientation is not to a revolution for the people of the highly developed capitalist countries. You know, we live in a world that is, it's an imperialist world. Larry's going to be taught, it's an imperialist world in which a fundamental and defining fault line and division is between the advanced capitalist, the privileged advanced capitalist oppressor nations, the imperialist oppressor nations, and the vast majority of humanity which resides, you know, in the oppressed nations of the third. Everything about this society, you know, about what exists here, including the development of the productive forces at this high technical level, is bound up with plunder and you know, with plunder and destruction of this whole planet and super exploitation of the wretched of the earth in the third world. Everything about this society. So this revolution that we're talking about, what this Constitution, it's very critical, and I'm going to stop here. This Constitution is very critical, is all about, you know, making a revolution in this society that will contribute to the emancipation of all of humanity and that will subordinate everything in this society. That is, its economic development and everything about it is going to be serving the cause of the advance of the world revolution. And a critical question is this great division between a revolution in the former United States, in a country which has ruled over and lorded over the world, has great responsibilities, right, towards the rest of the world, to, as I said, to be in a base area to promote revolution throughout the world. And everything about the reconstruction, the restructuring, and what we're talking about involves an awareness and is founded on this understanding that this imperialist division of the world is critical towards what the world looks like today, and transforming that is critical to what a world in which humanity can flourish, a world community of humanity where human beings can truly flourish, that is going to involve a very conscious struggle against all this imperialist privilege and everything that it's meant for the structure of the economy, for the structure of society, and for the consciousness of the people in this society. So this is not, or it is oriented only in that sense that we recognize, and it's oriented only in the sense that we are ideologically oriented towards the responsibility that we have towards transforming that relationship, that oppressive relationship to the rest of the world. What is that going to mean in terms of living standards in a new socialist society? What does that going to mean in terms of the input-output relations of the new socialists coming? All of this is factored in and through the thinking of this draft constitution. So when we say it's a draft, I just want to emphasize, we want to have robust debate and the ideas and input, but it is founded on an understanding of where society is today, where world humanity is, and where we need to go, and what we have to be doing here in this belly of the beast to contribute towards the overcoming of all relations of exploitation and domination on a world scale. So on that level, we want a lot of robust input and debate about this.
Let me put you up there.
I'll defer.
I'll defer. Thanks.
Just very briefly, the other thing is joining with people in struggle against the horrors of this world. Right now, 130 people in Guantanamo are on hunger strike, 166 people. The U.S. is fucking torturing people under, yes, Obama. Anyone with a conscience should be out with World Can't Wait or whatever organization is fighting this. And in the course of that journey, yes, let's do what Raymond said. Why is this happening? What is required to end this? And the other thing I'll just say quickly is, I take your point about I would say the defeat, the overthrow of socialism in China following Mao's death because of a coup, not collapse, was actually a coup d'etat. But your point is well taken. Without that pole, that was one of the contributing factors that led to the rise of Islamic fundamentalism, filling that void. But let's not forget another key element, and the determining element in many ways, was the actions of imperialism around the world, both not simply directly organizing in Afghanistan the jihadist movement, but also, or in Gaza and Palestine, but also through the workings of globalization, just driving millions from their previous existence in grinding oppression and so on. So, but I'll stop with that, and so we can get some more discussion. But if I could just finish, this is why it's so urgent to launch this new stage of the communist revolution. So these aren't the conditions and the choices that
Pole of attraction in the world.
Yeah, exactly, and actually changing.
Please.
The new film that we watched, a clip of BA Speaks Revolution, Nothing Less, roughly comes out about 10 years after BA's first, video talk in the 21st century, which was just a revolution talk. And I'll be brief when I ask, with the promotion of this new film and with all the things that have come out about it, how do both of you believe that the new film has, if to use my own terminology, transcended the first one? What is different about the new film? And what does that show for the RCP in the present? The fact that they've made those leaps from, say, 2003 to 2013, the difference in the new synthesis. And so what does that mean for your party in the present?
Well, first, just quickly, people really have to see the film. I'm not going to do justice to the film in anything I say, but I know we have copies of the DVD here, and this is an incredible journey. You saw 10 minutes of it here. This is three DVDs, a 6.5-hour summons to revolution, and addressing all the things standing in the way of this and how to go forward right here, right now. And so I would very strongly urge everybody to get it, show it together with your friends, come to Revolution Books and see it, debate it, discuss it, and so on and so forth. And on this, you know, Raymond, you had mentioned earlier this point about changing the ideological terrain as part of hastening fall away. This is tremendously important. And what's the key weight on people is there's no way out of this. Revolutions failed, socialism has failed, communism's a nightmare. All that sort of thing that just reinforces people's belief that while they may hate the way the world is, nothing's better as possible. This is an enormous weight on people, even whether they begin to question and resist things that are blatantly horrible and wrong. So promoting the film, B.A. Speaks Revolution, Nothing Less, and Bob Avakian's work in this sort of path-breaking summary of the first wave of the communist revolution, which was a gigantic step for liberation. I mean, as Raymond said, I'm going to be doing a panel on imperialism with some other folks, I think, who have very different views, and I think that will be a chance to get into this. But I think we shouldn't underestimate the impact that this can have, this film and Avakian's works more broadly can have on the ideological terrain. And I think it's very urgent. This is an urgent part of the political work we do. I also would recommend to people that there's a lot that's been posted at RevCom about the responses of many people to the film. I saw it in Oakland, California. You know, there was 150 people there, everybody from high school students to people over 80 years old, from East Oakland, which is the ghetto, for those who don't know, to the University of California. And if you read the newspaper, you get a sense of the impact and the interaction that many different kinds of people had with the film. In terms of did it transcend the first one, revolution, why it's necessary, why it's possible, and what it's all about. I wouldn't say transcend it. I wouldn't say transcend. I would argue that it's still, that's a really tremendous tool, remains a tremendous tool for people to dig into to understand what the title says, why it's necessary, why it's possible, what it's all about.
Do you mind, I mean, we are close to 1 o'clock, so I'd like to take, are there any other questions other than Ben on the floor? Yeah, so it's just, okay.
You want to take both questions? Is
What-
that a simpler way to do it?
Perhaps we should do that at this stage, yes. Ben,
And
there was
we
a
can-
hand up there. Is there?
I think there's, nope.
And you know, we can stay in here since it's a lunch break a bit after 10 after 1, or?
Yes, I believe so. I mean, I have to run because I'm going to run a meeting for my own staff at 1:30.
Oh,
but,
great,
you know,
okay.
But we could stay a little
But
bit.
others, if you
Yeah,
wanted to
certainly.
stay and just, yeah.
Please.
Okay, so you mentioned your differences with Trotskyists over the question of dictatorship of the proletariat, and I'd be very interested in hearing more about that. What would you say are the most important differences you have in your approach to governing a revolutionary state between yourself and a Trotskyist approach?
And then the question up front.
My question will be similar to the question of Spencer, because I think that Spencer's questions were not answered. You mentioned that in Greece or Egypt, thousands of people rise up and struggle, and there is also an urgent need for a left or a communist leadership. Do you think that Syriza or Muslim Brotherhood are the leadership in these countries and in these struggles? And if you don't think so, what does it obstruct other more radical left organizations or parties, similar to RCP for example, to influence and lead the masses, even though the supporters of these left organizations or parties work intensively on that direction?
Okay.
Just quickly to start.
You starting with him?
Start with him and then go to the Trotsky, and we'll do tag team. How about that? First of all, the Muslim Brotherhood is a reactionary, pro-imperialist organization that's founded on patriarchy and the oppression of women. I mean, this is I'm looking at what's going on in Egypt is not totally dissimilar to what happened with Ayatollah Khomeini in Iran. I'm not going to go on with that in detail, but they do, certainly these reactionary groups have influence. The Democratic Party in this country has influence. But the question for anybody who wants to see a different world is, how do we break the whole, how do we bring forward people under another line, ideology, and approach that's actually aimed at ending oppression, not perpetuating it in one form or another, which is exactly what the Muslim Brotherhood is doing in Egypt. And Raymond can speak a bit about Syriza. Look, I think it's important to proceed just as a general thing from, what does the world need? Not who's following whom at any given point in time and then attaching ourselves to that or working within that. Do we have to recognize reality and understand the reality we're confronted with? Yes, we do. But we can't be bound within those terms. Well, the Muslim Brotherhood's I'm not saying you were arguing this, but the Muslim Brotherhood seems to have the most following among, here's another way the reification of the workers gets involved. Oh, the religious forces, they have more people from the proletariat than the students and the radicals, the secular radicals. Therefore, let's support them. No, because their ideology is not at all it's antagonistic to the actual needs of the masses of people. So I think that the challenge is to bring forward, and I would really recommend people read Baba Bacon's statement on Egypt, on the uprising in Egypt, which I think they have on the table back there. What's needed is a revolutionary communist vanguard operating on a basis of a revolutionary and scientific understanding of what humanity needs, of the situation in the society, and a strategy from getting from here to there, which is not present in Egypt.
Yeah, on this point, I just think we need to be clear that there is no revolutionary communist, I'm saying small RC, there's no revolutionary communist vanguard formation in Egypt. There is none, and this is a problem. And I'm not sure what you were saying about the Muslim Brotherhood, but it was the Muslim Brotherhood represents all that's reactionary in that society, and is sort of bringing together, it's a fusion both of Islamic fundamentalism on the one hand, and it's also implementing the IMF dictates about how to maintain the Egyptian economy. So it is beholden to, and it's actually, it is beholden to imperialism. There's nothing. The question is, you need a revolution. What is the content of that revolution? And that revolution does have to break with these two outmotives of Islamic in a society like Islamic fundamentalism and with imperialism. And that means a radical rupture from the world economy and a radically transformative revolution. And that's going to involve, in these societies, the woman question, the oppression of women, is a front and center question in making revolution and what the content of that revolution is all about. That is not encompassed or encapsulated in a simple slogan of a workers' movement. You actually have to have a revolutionary communist movement that recognizes the fault lines in society, what it is that holds people down, shackles them, all of the oppressive ideas, the medieval feudal ideas that still exist, fused with modernity and its forms of oppression, imperialist modernity. You don't have a revolutionary communist vanguard in Egypt. You have left forces. Many of them were part of, old movements that had actually, some of the so-called communist groupings, were part of, old movements that had been part of, you know, sort of the political scene, fixtures and furniture on the political scene. That's not what we're talking about, just figuring out how to influence and be a pressure group on the scene. It is about making revolution, which has real content. So that's, I mean, in terms of Egypt. I think we don't have time. I think we should have some, you know, in terms of
Trotskyism. Yeah, 5 minutes if we can turn to that question.
So, I mean, Larry, you want to say something
Yeah,
else?
I'll
I mean, but, okay, go.
Well, I think first, Trotskyism's a different project than what we're talking about. The focus is on workers, control, workers, 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 not actually getting to the four alls and emancipating humanity. Number two, very importantly, Trotskyism rejects the whole first wave of the communist revolution. What was good ended in what, 1922, or they would argue, and totally, for the most part, dismisses the incredible achievements in the Russian Revolution and especially in the Chinese Revolution, including path-breaking advances in terms of how you continue the revolution under the dictatorship of the proletariat to lessen the great divides in society between mental and manual work, worker and peasant, town and country. And finally, I would just say, Trotskyism isn't about making revolution. I mean, Trotskyism is about, you know, empowering workers within the confines of the imperialist order, not actually organizing a movement for revolution to defeat, to dismantle and defeat this oppressive state and, you know, bring into being a revolutionary state power. And I think the earlier discussion we had about the reification of the workers, that your question is very relevant to this, because they remain stuck in that. I mean, that was quick. I'm sure you had things that, why don't you,
Well, I don't know where we want. I'm just trying to. I mean, I think you know, it's we should explore this some more. I think that first of all, there's been no Trotskyite-led revolution in the world. Okay, there's been no, you know, and I wouldn't want to see such a revolution or be part of it. It's not a radically transformative project. First point that Larry was making, that we are talking about something utterly different, you know, which is, you know, uprooting, you know, all systems and relations of exploitation and oppression, and unleashing, you know, the masses of people to change society and change, you know, the world and change their thinking. And very profound. What we, you know, what has to be understood is a total revolution is what we're talking about. A total revolution in the economic, social, ideological, and cultural realm. That a total revolution, which is going to draw forward from all forces of society, you know, except for the ruling class, all forces of society, all the diverse currents, is going to be a revolution, you know, that's going to actually sort of be led by a visionary vanguard party that bases itself on the most scientific understanding of how the world is and how it can be radically transformed, and unleashes a process. And this is what's set out in this Constitution for the new, you know, socialist republic, unleashes a profound transformative process. You know, Marx talked about the communist revolution as involving the two most radical ruptures with traditional property relations and with traditional ideas and thinking. We're talking about a revolution of this depth, and it's an internationalist revolution, and it's a revolution that can be made in this world, and it's going to involve, you know, profound interaction between what happens in the imperialist countries, getting back to his point, and what happens in other parts of the world. Trotskyism, you know, has been disdainful historically of the peasantry, couldn't see why the most radical revolutionary experience of the 20th century in a world history was the Cultural Revolution in China. We have a whole understanding and analysis of why that was the most liberating chapter in human history, and why we have to go further and do better, because it had serious problems as well. But it was the most liberating chapter in human history. Trotskyism can't even see that because of its narrow, insular, parochial orientation towards the workers and towards, to get back to your point, the first world. So, you know, this is a big, big issue that we need to sort of get into, you know, about what is the nature of this, a truly radically transformative project, or are we talking about, shifting the chairs, on the deck of imperialism, in the name of workers, asserting their rights.
Sharing the spoils of
And-
imperialism.
And I think this is a theme that we've been hitting at, I do, and that, is that, back to your, that we cannot, make revolution that without recognizing this great fault line in the world, and we're not about socializing the plunder of imperialism and raising standards of the workers, and everything, democracy in this society is built on a platform of exploitation and domination throughout the world. So we recognize this, it's not a bad point here, I see, to end on. The sort of the internationalist, sort of a truly internationalist perspective based on the capacity of the wretched of the earth, led by a visionary vanguard to remake the world and remake themselves.
But excellent question.
Well, thank you all. I hope that has whet your appetite. Larry will be presenting this evening, this afternoon,
2:30.
in this very room, and that will be moderated by my comrade in arms, Lucy Parker. Thank you all.